Under a sky roiling with angry dark clouds, fierce winds tore across the barren plains, like wild beasts unleashed. The small village huddled beneath the tempest's wrath, but none felt the storm's menace as keenly as the widow standing firm at the edge of her land. Her gaze was sharp despite the biting cold, eyes narrowing against the stinging rain that masked desperate cries carried by the shrieking wind. She had heard them, the ragged voices of the Apache Cowboys trapped beyond the ridge, caught without shelter, with the storm threatening to drown them in terror and death. The widow's hands, worn yet steady, grasped the reins of her solitary horse as she turned toward the approaching darkness, knowing the risk she was about to take. Her small homestead sat isolated, far from any aid, a lone beacon amid the howling wilderness. The sky's fury echoed the turmoil inside her, a mix of fear for herself and fierce resolve to act. The storm was no respecter of lives, but her courage burned quietly amid the tempest's wrath. Beyond the swirling dust and blinding sheets of rain, the cowboys struggled against the gale, their horses rearing and stumbling on the slippery ground. These Apache men were seasoned survivors, stoic warriors of the desert, yet now vulnerable, bound by nature's unforgiving grip and the unforgiving world that often misunderstood them. Their wary eyes searched for refuge, only to find her ranch, the widow's sanctuary, standing as an unlikely safe haven. It was a fragile hope, yet the only one they had. As the cowboys reached her fence line, the widow met them not with fear or suspicion, but with a steady hand and an unspoken understanding born from shared hardship. The air between them was taut with tension. Years of mistrust between settlers and Apache, etched deep within the land's memory. But tonight, survival outweighed old wounds. Her resolve to shelter them spoke volumes in the freezing howl of the storm. And slowly, the barriers of doubt softened. Inside the weather-beaten cabin, the lamplight flickered, casting long shadows across weathered faces, lined with skepticism and guarded gratitude. The widow moved quietly among them, offering dry blankets and strong coffee brewed over the sputtering stove. Each gesture built a fragile bridge between two worlds rarely so close. Yet beneath the calm, a silent question lingered, heavy as the thunder overhead. What price would this mercy demand in a land where old grudges never die easily? The tension escalated in the whispered talks among the villagers, their eyes darting anxiously toward the horizon, beyond the storm's veil. Rumors of old rivalries, revived by the presence of these Apache cowboys, began to stir unease. The widow's act of salvation threatened to unravel the fragile peace that held the community together. Whispers grew of suspicion and fear, while the cowboys themselves exchanged uncertain glances, aware that the danger might not have passed with the storm's retreat. On the second day after the tempest, just as the sky began to clear and hope seemed to find a cautious foothold, a figure cloaked in dust and shadow approached the village. The quiet was broken by the ominous arrival of an emissary, whose message carried the weight of secrets best left buried. In his hand, a worn document threatened to shatter the tentative alliance forged in the tempest's eye, stirring echoes of betrayals long thought dead. What the Apache Cowboys did then would shock the village to its core, forcing the widow and her unexpected guests to confront a reckoning far more dangerous than any storm. Trust would be tested, alliances shattered or reforged, and the true cost of survival revealed. Many companions who follow our legends through these forgotten lands say that fate, or YouTube's own tricky algorithm, sometimes cancels their subscriptions without warning. Before the next storm uncovers what lies ahead, glance down below this video and make sure you're still signed up with our band so you don't lose the thread of the tale. We don't want you to miss a single voice echoing through this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The dawn broke thin and gray, the storm's rage spent, but the land still soaked and trembling beneath heavy skies. The widow stood at her cabin's threshold, the cold damp seeping into her bones, as her eyes traced the distant ridge where the dust-cloaked figure had vanished the day before. The man's arrival lingered like a shadow no one dared name, an emissary whose grim message had unsettled the fragile hearth between her and the Apache Cowboys she'd sheltered. Inside, the stoic men shifted uneasily on creaking floorboards, their gazes never settling, as if the walls themselves whispered danger. The widow's hands trembled only briefly as she refilled worn tin cups with bitter coffee, strong enough to stir courage in even the most hardened soul. Beneath the flicker of the oil lamp, she met the gaze of the Apache leader, his eyes sharp but tired, etched with lines forged by desert sorrows and sword-sharp burdens. "I found this," he said quietly, voice rough like gravel, placing the ancient, creased document atop the table. The paper bore the harsh seal of the territorial governor, and words inked, in solemn tones, an order commanding their removal, branding them as outlaws and enemies of the settlers. The widow's breath caught, a storm of dread swelling inside her, far fiercer than the tempest outside. "We took shelter under your roof," she whispered, "and now they come with laws and guns to bar your path." The Apache warrior's jaw tightened. "They seek to bind our freedom with chains, feed old grudges with fresh blood. We are hunted, not by nature alone, but by those who dwell behind these fences." Outside, distant hoofbeats echoed faintly, the herald of approaching danger creeping closer like a wraith. A restless silence settled, thick with unspoken fears. The widow's mind raced. Her act of mercy, meant to save lives, had stirred it, hornet's nest of threats beyond the storm's reach. As the day crept onward, the villagers' whispers grew louder, laced with suspicion and unease. Some called the Apache ghosts, others savages, but all feared the violence that shadowed their steps. The widow balked at the rising tide of distrust, tightening like a noose around her fragile sanctuary. Yet in the eyes of the cowboys, she read resilience etched into their wild spirits. men who bore scars visible and hidden, yet refused to bow to the crushing weight of hatred. That evening, while the sun bled light slowly behind smudged clouds, an impossible choice pressed on the widow's heart. A choice between turning away the Apache to preserve her standing with the settlers, or standing firm, risking all. For a code older than any land claim or government decree. Around the sputtering fire, stories surfaced in murmurs, tales of betrayal and blood past, friendships broken by fear's sharp blade, and promises whispered under starless skies. The Apache spoke softly of a brother lost to a merciless posse. The widow shared memories of her husband, taken by the cold hand of war years ago. Between them, a fragile thread wove, a hesitant human connection amidst the chaos of survival. But trust was a fragile currency, weighed down by promises made and broken countless times before, slipping through fingers calloused by pain. That night, the widow's cabin became a crucible where duty, fear, loyalty, and kindness clashed like thunderclaps. None could escape the gravity of the approaching reckoning. Suddenly, a sharp crack tore through the night. A rifle shot, ringing out in the valley like an ominous drumbeat. Hearts stilled, breaths caught frozen in chests, as eyes darted toward the door. The warrior snapped upright, voice tense. "They found us earlier than expected." Steps pounded on the soft earth, frantic and deliberate, drawing closer with every heartbeat. The cowboys scrambled to arm themselves. The widow clenched her fists, muscles taut as bowstrings. Shadows danced fiercely on weathered walls as lamplight flickered, mirroring the storm still raging inside. From the threshold, a silhouette appeared, hood thrown back to reveal a man marked by the law's cold determination, a bounty hunter known for his merciless resolve. His gaze searched the room, settling coldly on the Apache survivors and then the widow. "You harbor fugitives," he said flatly. "The law's bounty is high. Surrender now or face the consequences." Silence shattered like glass. The widow's voice broke through, steady and fierce. "These men found shelter here. They owe no harm to this land." The hunter's smirk twisted. "Shelter won't save you from justice." The gap between law and justice yawned wide, threatening to consume all hope. The Apache leader stepped forward, eyes blazing with quiet fire. "We did not seek war, only survival. But if it's a fight they want, we will not run into the night again." Tension cracked the air, every soul poised on the precipice between mercy and bloodshed. Then, without warning, a piercing whistle sliced through the night. From the shadows emerged a second figure, someone the widow recognized instantly. A settler, once a friend turned bitter foe, now armed and determined. His presence spelled betrayal, more chilling than any storm. The man's eyes locked on the widow. "You chose to side with them," he spat. "You have made your enemies tonight." The cabin froze, breaths suspended like dust in a shaft of fading light. The widow's heart sank, but her resolve ignited. The fight to protect what was right, to defy hatred and fear, had just begun. And now the true tempest was gathering. not of wind or rain, but of blood and broken trust. Outside, the storm clouds thickened once more, blacker and more threatening than before. The widow glanced toward the ridge where the first shadows of the coming battle stretched long and dark against the violent sky. And then, from the depths of that gathering darkness, a voice, cold, distant, and merciless, cut through the wild wind. The hunters have arrived, and none will leave this valley unscarred. A sharp crack tore through the night air, an echo that seemed to split the very silence holding the cabin in its suffocating grip. The Apache warrior's body tensed. Every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. The widow's breath hitched as she pressed herself against the rough-hewn wall, her hands clenched tight, knuckles pale from desperation. Outside, the pounding steps drew closer, relentless as the thunder rolling beyond the ridge. Unease settled over the room. Like a thick fog, the lamplight flickered wildly, casting monstrous shadows that writhed across the wooden beams. The cattle's distant lowing was swallowed by the chorus of rattling thunder and shrieking wind. But in the widow's breast, a storm yet fiercer roared. The men she had risked everything to shelter, stoic souls marked by desert sun and unforgiving battles, were poised on the precipice of a reckoning neither she nor they had invited. The bounty hunter's silhouette darkened the doorway. His boots scraped against the dirt floor as he stepped inside, eyes scanning, calculating. "You harbor fugitives under your roof," he stated, voice cold and flat as a blade's edge. "This ends tonight." The Apache leader rose slowly, steady as a mountain root. The lines on his weathered face deepening under the fierce lamplight. His gaze met the hunter's without flinching. "The law you chase is blind to truth. These men seek only to live, not to spill blood." A murmur rose from the other cowboys. Some gripped rifles, others exchanged looks, heavy with memories of betrayals and battles past. The widow felt the weight of their distrust as palpably as the cold that pressed through the cabin walls. Outside, the air seemed to still, as if the earth itself held its breath. The widow's eyes locked on the hunters. "Justice is not served through fear and gunfire," she said, voice firmer than she felt. "These men saved their lives seeking shelter here. You will not take them without cause." The hunter's smirk curled at the edge. Shelter is no shield against bounty. Before the tension could snap, a piercing whistle sliced through the night, a sound sharp and deliberate. From the shadows emerged a second figure, a man whose outline the widow knew too well. Once a friend, now a stranger clad in resentment and steel. His eyes seethed with betrayal as they fixed on her. "You stand with enemies of the land," he spat with venom. "You betray your own blood." A hush fell. The cabin's air grew thick, suffocating. The widow's heart pounded with the fury of a storm threatening to break free. She faced him, steady, unyielding. "I stand for what is right." The settler's hand hovered over the rifle. At his side, fingers twitching like a rattlesnake, ready to strike. The Apache leader stepped forward, voice low but electric with resolve. We did not ask for war, but if war is what they bring, we will not flee into the night." A tense silence cracked with the onset of a new sound, the distant rasp of hooves pounding harder than before. The storm had returned, not in wind or rain, but in the form of coming riders who bore with them old grudges and fresh threats. Shadows lengthened and crept toward the valley like the fingers of some dark god. Inside, the widow's courage trembled but did not break. She moved among the men, catching their eyes, each gaze a silent promise that whatever came, they would meet it together. Memories of her husband flickered unbidden, a flame against the darkness of despair. The blood spilled in that distant past whispered warnings, but also drove a fierce hope. That protection, no matter the cost, was a debt of honor. Must we choose between the past and the future? She wondered aloud, voice barely a thread in the thickening gloom. The Apache leader's gaze softened for a moment as he approached her side. In this land, the past is a ghost that never leaves, but tomorrow, if we live to see it, belongs to those who fight for new paths. The distant riders came closer, their numbers unseen, but their intent unmistakable. Every muscle within the widow ached with the weight of impending conflict, the knowledge that tonight's fragile bonds would face their truest test. Suddenly, the cabin door crashed open, slammed by a gust that swept in the scent of dust and leather. A sharp-eyed man strode forward from the storm's maw. Another hunter, a shadow darker than the last. "No safe harbor remains," he declared, voice grim as a death knell. "The law rides with vengeance, and the valley will burn with it." The widow's heart clenched like a fist. Outside, the sky boiled with fury, as if the earth itself prepared to swallow them whole. The Apache Cowboys readied weapons, eyes burning with fierce defiance, tempered by wary hope. She stood at the threshold between mercy and ruin, feeling the storm's icy breath mingle with her own resolve. And then from the blackened hills above, a gunshot rang out, alone, sharp, and deadly, a signal not of hope, but of betrayal. The widow's gaze shot upward, catching a single figure silhouetted against gathering clouds, poised with a rifle aimed not at the invaders, but at those she sought to protect. The valley's fragile peace shattered as the whispered words of a deadly truth slipped on the wind. "One of us has already turned." A sharp crack tore through the night air, an echo that seemed to split the very silence, holding the cabin in its suffocating grip. Every breath caught like a shard of glass, every muscle tensed like a bowstring pulled taut. The Apache leader's eyes snapped toward the door, filled with the cold fire of a trapped wolf. Outside, the soft earth trembled beneath the heavy steps closing in, relentless, as the storm had been days before. The widow stood rigid, pressed against the rough-hewn wall, her hands tight fists of trembling resolve. The lamplight flickered wildly, casting monstrous shadows that writhed and merged with the growing dread suffusing the cabin. The bounty hunter's silhouette darkened the entrance. His boots scraped the floor, a harsh, deliberate sound. "You harbor fugitives under your roof," he announced like a death sentence. This ends tonight. The Apache leader rose with quiet dignity, the weight of many burdens lining his weathered face. He met the hunter's cold gaze without flinching. The law you serve blinds you to truth. We seek only to live, not to shed blood anew. Behind him, the other cowboys shifted, hands tightening on rifles, eyes clouded with memories of betrayal and the hard lessons of the desert. The widow felt the invisible threads of fear and distrust tangle around her sanctuary. Outside, the air seemed to still. It was as if the earth itself held its breath. She fixed her gaze on the hunter. "Justice is not served with gunfire and threats," she said. Her voice steady, despite the pounding in her chest. "These men found shelter here. You will take none without cause." The hunter's smirk twisted, sharp and cruel. "Shelter is no shield from bounty." Then, a piercing whistle sliced the air, a deliberate, chilling blade of sound. From the shadows came a second figure, his outline familiar and yet alien. Once a friend to the widow, now a bitter foe cloaked in resentment and steel. His cold eyes locked onto her with venom. "You stand with the enemies of this land," he spat. "You betray your own." A suffocating hush descended. The cabin's air grew heavy, thick with accusation. The widow's heart hammered, drowning out the thunder still rolling beyond the ridge. She faced him, unwavering. "I stand for what is right." A tense silence stretched, shattered only by the settler's hand twitching near his rifle, like a rattlesnake ready to strike. The Apache leader stepped forward, voice low and electric. "We ask for no war, but if war is what they bring, we shall not flee into the night." Feet pounded harder, the distant rasp of hooves a grim herald. Shadows lengthened, creeping like the fingers of some dark god toward their fragile refuge. Within the cabin, courage trembled but did not break. The widow moved between the men, meeting eyes with silent promises. Whatever came, they faced it together. Memories flickered. Her husband's face, lost to Cold War's cruelty, a flame against the creeping shadows. Blood spilled before whispered of sorrow, yet also fierce hope. Protection, no matter the cost, was in unshakable debt. "Must we choose between past and future?" she murmured, voice barely more than a thread, weaving through the thickening gloom. The Apache leader's gaze softened momentarily. "Here, the past is a ghost that lingers. But if we live to see tomorrow, it belongs to those who fight for new paths." The storm had returned, not in rain, but in the growing number of riders, their intent clear in every approaching silhouette. The widow's limbs ached beneath the weight of the coming conflict. Tonight's fragile alliance faced its gravest test. Suddenly, the cabin door crashed open, flung by a fierce gust that smelled of dust and leather. Another hunter strode inside, darker and more ominous than the last. "No haven remains," he declared, voice grim like a death knell. "The law rides with vengeance. This valley will burn with it." The widow felt her heart shatter, clenched in icy fingers. Outside, the sky boiled as if the earth itself prepared to swallow them whole. The Apache Cowboys readied weapons, eyes burning with a fierce defiance tempered by wary hope. She stood at the boundary between mercy and ruin, feeling the sorry breath of the storm mingle with her own resolve. Then, a single shot echoed from the black hills above, sharp and precise. Not a call for aid, but a whispered death sentence. Her gaze snapped upward to a lone figure silhouetted against the swollen clouds. Rifle steady, aimed not at the riders below, but at those she had sworn to protect. The valley's fragile peace shattered in that instant. The whispered truth slipped on the wind like a deadly gale. One of us has already turned. A sharp crack shattered the tense silence like a jagged bolt striking stone. Every breath in the dim cabin caught as one. Frozen, slicing through the thick air, heavy with dread. The Apache leader's head snapped toward the door, eyes blazing with the cold fire of a cornered wolf, muscles taut, ready to spring. Outside, the hard thud of boots against earth grew louder, relentless as the thunder roaring beyond the ridge. The widow pressed herself, cold and still, against the rough-hewn wall, her hands clenched so tight, her knuckles blanched white, a silent anchor against the rising storm inside. The hunter's shadow darkened the doorway. His boots scraped against the wooden floor, deliberate and sharp. "You harbor fugitives beneath your roof," he declared flatly. "This ends tonight." The Apache man rose slowly, a mountain rooted firm through years of hardship. His weathered face, carved by sun and sorrow, held steady as he met the hunter's steely gaze. "The law you serve is blind to truth. We seek only to live, not to spill more blood upon the dust." Behind him, the other cowboys shifted uneasily, fingers tightening on rifles, haunted eyes clouded with betrayals past. The widow felt the invisible grip of suspicion twisting around her sanctuary like a choking vine. Outside, the earth seemed to hold its breath. Silence fell thick, pressing, as if the world itself awaited the verdict. Her gaze locked with the hunter's cold eyes. "Justice is no stranger to mercy," she said, quietly, voice firm despite the clamoring fear in her chest. "They found refuge here, and you will not take them without cause." His lips curled into a cruel smirk. "Refuge is no shield from the bounty." Then a piercing whistle sliced the night, raw and deliberate, cutting through the heavy tension like a sharpened blade. From the shadows stepped a second figure, one whose outline was all too familiar. Once a friend, now a stranger crowned with bitterness and steel. His gaze flickered venom as it locked onto the widow. "You stand with our enemies," he spat. "You've betrayed your own." A suffocating hush fell upon the cabin, thick as smoke. Hearts thundered, breaths caught tight in lungs, swelling with charge and dread. The widow met his gaze unbowed. "I stand for what is right." His hand twitched near the rifle at his side, poised like a viper ready to strike. The Apache leader stepped forward, voice low and crackling with restrained fury. "We seek no war. But if war is what they bring, we will not flee into the night again." The distant pounding of hooves rose like a thunderous drum, fresh shadows stretching long and monstrous toward their fragile refuge. Every muscle in the widow's body screamed against the weight of the coming storm. A reckoning far deadlier than any before. Inside the cabin, courage burned fierce, but trembling. The widow moved among the men, meeting their eyes. Silent pledges forged in fire. Whatever came, they would face it as one. Ghosts flickered through her thoughts. Her husband's face, lost to icy war's cruelty. A single flame against the dark. Blood spilled long ago whispered sorrow and fierce hope. To protect, no matter the cost, was a sacred vow, written in flesh and dust. Must the past swallow the future whole? She dared murmur, voice barely more than a thin thread weaving through the thickening gloom. The Apache leader's eyes softened for the barest moment. Here, the past clings like a ghost that will not rest. But if we live to see tomorrow, it will belong to those who dare carve new paths. The riders grew closer now, their intent carved sharp, as obsidian in every shape, looming against the storm-darkened hills. The widow's limbs ached beneath the crushing weight of what would soon come. Tonight's fragile alliance teetered on the edge of obliteration. Suddenly, the cabin door slammed open, whipped wide by a wild gust that smelled of dust, sweat, and leather. Another hunter stepped inside, darker and more ominous than the last. A shadow crawling from the storm's depths. "No sanctuary remains," he croaked, voice a death knell. "The law rides with vengeance. This valley will burn in its fury." The widow's chest tightened, heart clenched in icy grip. Outside, the sky roiled wild, as if the earth itself braced to swallow them whole. The Apache Cowboys braced firm, eyes burning with fierce, desperate defiance tempered by wary hope. She stood on the knife's edge, a threshold between mercy and ruin, feeling the icy breath of the storm mingle with her own fierce resolve. Then, from the black hills above, a single gunshot shattered night's fragile silence. Sharp, precise, deadly. Not a cry for help, not a call to arms, a whispered death warrant. Her gaze flew upward, to a lone figure, framed stark against swollen thunderheads, rifle steady, sight fixed, not on the riding horde, but on those she sought to protect. In an instant, the valley's fragile peace splintered and fell away, and the whispered truth slid cold as ice on the rushing wind. Among us, a betrayed shadow has already taken aim. The night air snapped with tension as the hunter's heavy boots stirred the dust at the cabin's threshold. Inside, the flickering lamplight trembled, casting fleeting shapes across strained faces pressed close to the worn wooden walls. Every breath quivered like a fragile ember in a gathering storm. The widow's gaze was sharp, fierce as the desert wind that once tore across these plains. Her heart hammered, but her voice was steady. These men sought shelter beneath my roof. Justice should not breed cruelty. The hunter's gaze remained unmoved, calculating. Shelter is just a brief reprieve. The law never forgets its debts. His hand hovered near the rifle slung low at his side, a quiet promise of violence. From the shadows, the Apache leader stepped forward, his presence calm yet unyielding. The sun's scars had etched resilience into his weathered face, but now, beneath lamplight, vulnerability flickered in his tired eyes. "We are hunted for living honestly," he said, voice low but carrying the weight of years marked by betrayal. "Your guns seek to bind what winds will not be caught." The other cowboys shifted in near silence, muscles tense beneath worn leather. Their eyes darted between hunter and settler, suspicions simmering beneath years of hardship and unspoken grief. The widow moved among them, hands steady as she offered coffee, thick and black as the night that pressed against their fragile walls. A sudden whistle cut through the taut silence, sharp, deliberate. From the dark haze at the cabin's edge emerged a figure cloaked in dust, his features hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The widow's breath hitched. She knew that silhouette all too well. Once a trusted friend, turned bitter foe, carrying the cold flame of vengeance in his eyes. "You shelter ghosts," the man spat, his voice edged with venom. "You choose exile over allegiance. Your choice marks you." The cabin seemed to constrict. The air thickened with accusation and dread. Even the fire's sputtering glow faltered beneath the weight of unspoken threats. The widow met his glare, unflinching. "I stand for what binds us: honor, mercy, survival, not the poison of hatred." His scowl deepened, fingers twitching near the rifle at his side, like a serpent poised to strike. The Apache leader's gaze grew fierce, voice ringing low yet steady. "We fled only to find shelter, not war. But if war is what they bring, we will face it as one, with unbroken will." Outside, the pounding of hoofs rose, a shadow's approach, swelling into a thunderous drumbeat that shattered the fragile quiet. The storm may have passed, but now a new tempest surged, one brewed by human hearts, hardened by grudges and ancient sorrows. Suddenly, the cabin door was thrown open with a violent gust, rain and dust swirling like a furious ghost through the threshold. Another figure emerged, silent, grim, a darker shadow than the others. His voice cut through the chaos with grim finality. "No sanctuary remains. The law rides with vengeance tonight. None will leave this valley unmarked." The widow's breath caught, a cold knot tightening in her chest. She glanced toward the ridge, where black clouds churned like brewing fury. The cowboys readied themselves silently, eyes aflame with grim resolve, tempered by locked hope. She moved among them, touching weathered arms, catching quick nods, filled with unspoken promises. Memories of loss, blood, and broken oaths flickered through her mind, the cruel price of survival on this unforgiving land. Her voice broke the tension, soft but fierce. "In this valley, between hate and mercy, the future waits. We either carve it together or perish divided." The Apache leader's eyes met hers, a flicker of rare warmth, haunting the storm's shadow. Beneath his brow, the spirits watch. They see who stands and who falters. A sudden crack split the air. A gunshot fired from the distant hills, sharp and deliberate as the crack of thunder. Silence swallowed the cabin as all eyes shot upward. There, silhouetted against the gathering gloom, stood a lone figure, rifle poised, Steady hands aimed not at the approaching riders, but at those sheltered within this fragile refuge. A deadly silence swallowed the valley, and the whispered truth drifted on the cold wind, carving shadows in the hearts gathered below. One of us has already turned. A gunshot cracked through the night, sharp as lightning splitting dark skies. Every breath held within the cabin caught like a whispered prayer, suspended yet heavy with dread. The Apache leader's eyes burned cold, scanning the doorway where shadows writhed wildly in the flickering lamplight. Muscles coiled like springs taut with silent menace. Outside, the earth trembled beneath the mounting footsteps, inching closer like a relentless tide. The bounty hunter's silhouette darkened the threshold. His boots scraped against the dusty wooden floor, deliberate, a harbinger of reckoning. "You shelter fugitives beneath your roof," he declared, voice clipped and flat as a knife's edge. "This ends now." The leader rose, solemn and unyielding, the lines on his sun-baked face deepening like canyons carved by years of hardship. His gaze locked with the hunters, unwavering and resolute. Justice blind to truth serves only itself. We seek life, not needless bloodshed. Behind him, the cowboys shifted uneasily, fingers tightening on worn rifles, haunted by betrayals etched into memory like scars. The widow felt the cold web of suspicion tighten around their fragile sanctuary. Outside, as if time itself held its breath, the world fell silent. Her gaze anchored on the hunter's unflinching eyes. Mercy is justice's heart. These men fled storms of hatred to find shelter here. You will take none without cause. A cruel smirk twisted the hunter's lips. Refuge is no shield from the law's gaze. Suddenly, a piercing whistle ricked the silence, a cold, deliberate shard of sound slicing the night. From the black gloom emerged a second figure, cloaked in dust and shadow. The widow's breath stilled, familiar and yet estranged. It was a friend turned foe, eyes burning with bitter fire. "You harbor ghosts," he spat venomously. "You choose exile over kinship. Your path is betrayal." A suffocating hush descended. The air thickened, heavy with ancient grudges and fresh venom. The widow met his gaze, steady and unyielding. "I stand for honor, for survival, not hatred's poison." His hand twitched beside the rifle at his side, ready to strike like a rattlesnake awakened. The Apache leader stepped forward, voice low but charged, crackling like distant thunder. "We asked for no war, but if war is delivered, we shall not vanish into the night again." Beyond the cabin, the sound of horses galloping thundered, a dark storm of riders swelling swiftly, shadows growing long and monstrous beneath choking skies. Every nerve in the widow's body screamed against the crushing weight of impending violence. Inside, courage flickered but held firm. The widow moved among the men, catching wild eyes with quiet promises. Whatever came, they faced it as one. Ghosts haunted her thoughts, her husband's face lost to cold war's cruel hand. A lone flame flickering against the encroaching void. Blood spilled long ago, murmured warnings, and fierce hope Protection at all costs demanded sacrifice, a sacred oath etched in sweat and pain. "Must the past devour the future whole?" she whispered, voice a fragile thread stretched tight in the gloom. The Apache leader's eyes softened briefly, a flicker of warmth beneath the storm's shadow. "The past clings like a ghost, unwilling to rest. Yet if we survive the night, tomorrow belongs to those who dare carve new paths." The riders approached faster now, their intent as clear and sharp as obsidian daggers poised to strike. The widow's limbs trembled beneath the weight of fate's cruel hand. Tonight's fragile alliance balanced precariously on the edge of oblivion. Suddenly, the cabin door slammed open, thrown wide by a violent gust carrying dust and rain, a furious ghost swirling across their refuge. Another hunter stepped inside, darker, colder than the last. His voice cut clean through the chaos. "No sanctuary endures," he declared, grim as a death knell. "The law rides with vengeance. This valley will burn with its fury." The widow's chest clenched, eyes flicked toward the boiling sky, where the earth writhed in turmoil. The Apache Cowboys readied themselves, iron-willed and fiercely defiant, tempered by the faintest ember of hope. She stood on a razor's edge, the thin line between mercy and ruin, feeling the storm's icy breath mingle with her own raging resolve. Then, above the roiling hills, came a single shot, sharp, deadly, final. Not a cry for aid, not a call to arms, a whispered death sentence. Her gaze shot upward to a lone figure silhouetted stark against swollen thunderheads, rifle steady, aimed not at the riders swelling below, but at those she sought to protect. The valley's fragile peace shattered as silence cracked open, and on the cold wind's cruel breath came the whispered truth. "One of us has already turned." A gunshot cracked through the night air, sharp and sudden, shattering the dense veil of silence that had settled like a shroud over the cabin. Every soul inside froze, breath caught like dust held tight in the desert wind. The Apache leader's eyes narrowed, burning with the steely resolve of a predator cornered but unbroken. The widow's heart slammed against her ribs as the room's tense shadows twisted and lengthened in the flickering lamplight. Outside, beneath the swollen, roiling clouds, the heavy thudding of hooves grew louder, an ominous drumbeat echoing through the valley's hollow. The storm had returned, not in wind or rain, but mounted on the backs of men whose grudges ran as deep as the arid earth beneath their feet. The weight of imminent violence pressed down like the cold rain had days before, suffocating hope beneath its merciless grip. The cabin door jerked open, flung wide by a bitter gust that carried dust and cold air swirling inside. A second hunter stepped into the wavering light, his silhouette darker and more menacing than the first. His gaze swept across the faces, illuminated by the sputtering fire. The Apache survivors, and the widow, standing firm among them. There was no mercy in his eyes, only the hard, unyielding edge of vengeance. "No safe haven remains," he declared, voice low and edged with finality. "The law rides with swift justice. This valley will burn with it." The widow's breath caught, her resolve tightening like rawhide. She met the hunter's gaze, unbowed. These men came to me seeking refuge, not rebellion. I will not betray that trust. The Apache leader stepped forward, voice calm but charged with fierce determination. We sought shelter, not war. Yet if war is what they bring, we will not run into the night again. A deadly hush fell. Time seemed to fracture. Each heartbeat stretched between trembling breaths. Outside, the pounding hooves crescendoed into a relentless tide of sound. Shadows spilled across the cabin walls like creeping smoke. The fragile alliance, forged in tempest and fear, teetered on the edge of collapse. Then, unexpectedly, the door slammed shut with a solid, final thud, sealing the cabin's occupants inside a crucible of mounting dread. The widow moved swiftly, locking the heavy wooden door with a rattling bolt. Her hands shook only briefly before steadying, clutching the worn metal like a lifeline. Around the cramped room, the cowboys readied their weapons, faces etched with the raw lines of battle-hardened men who had seen too much to flinch now. The widow's gaze darted to the worn document they had spread across the rough table, a grim reminder of the lawful decree branding the Apache as outlaws. They will stop at nothing to drive you from this land, she said softly, voice thick with fear and fierce resolve. But we have a choice now. The leader's eyes darkened, shadows deepening their ancient fire. To fight is to survive, but survival means more than blood spilled or enemies vanquished. It means holding on to our humanity even as the storm rages. Outside, an eerie stillness briefly flickered. Then a sudden rustle at the window stole their breath, sharper than the wind, followed by faint footsteps pressed against the dry earth. The widow's eyes locked onto the fleeting movement. Someone was watching them from the darkness, a silent threat lurking just beyond fragile walls. Suspicion tightened around the room like a noose. We're not alone, whispered one of the cowboys, voice tight as twisted wire. They circle us. They wait for weakness. The widow swallowed hard. She caught the Apache leader's gaze, steady and unyielding. Whatever comes, we face it together, no matter the cost. Her words hung in the heavy air as the wind outside rose again, clutching at the cabin's edges, carrying with it the howl of a wild land that never forgets old wounds or new betrayals. Then, cutting through the rising storm, a shadow stretched across the hearth, a lone figure stepping forward from the deepest gloom. The widow recognized the silhouette instantly, a name from whispered pasts and broken promises. His eyes, once familiar, now gleamed cold, with a knife's edge intent. "You hide a traitor," he said, voice low and deadly, cutting through the fragile bonds like a scythe through dry grass. One of your own turned his back, sold us out before this night even began. Silence twisted into panic, hearts pounding wild, trust shattered in a single breath. The widow's hand went to the small, worn locket resting against her neck, her husband's memory, and with it a fierce promise. "Who?" she demanded, voice strong despite the rising tide of dread tightening her throat. Before the whisper of a reply, a heavy gunshot rang out, again more distant this time, but no less certain, a signal fired into the storm to mark the beginning of a reckoning far fiercer than rain or wind. Outside, the first of the riders cleared the ridge, dark shapes, galloping sharp against the storm-blackened sky. And as the cabin's fragile refuge trembled beneath the thunder of hooves, the whispered truth bled through the chaotic night. Among us, the betrayer waits in shadow, and the true battle has only just begun. The cabin was thick with silence, broken only by the shallow breaths of those trapped within. The widow's gaze flickered to the lone figure silhouetted against the storm-darkened ridge. Still standing, rifle raised, aim unshaken. Her heart pounded fiercely, but her resolve was fiercer. Tonight, the fragile alliance forged in tempest and doubt would meet its reckoning. The betrayed shadow among them had revealed itself, and now the final chapter unfolded. The Apache leader's eyes blazed with tempered fury. "The traitor marks our doom," he said quietly, "but we choose how we face it." His voice was a steady drumbeat of honor in the swirling chaos. Around him, the cowboys clenched rifles, steel and sweat ready to meet whatever storm approached. The widow stepped forward, voice steady. "This land has known too much blood. We will not add to its sorrow easily." Her stare locked on the man-turned-foe, the settler who had broken their fragile peace with venomous words and deadly intent. "You chose betrayal, but we choose courage to face what comes as one." Outside, the rumble of hooves thundered closer, shadows dark and mounting. The second hunter advanced, gun poised, eyes cold mirrors of relentless justice. Yet before the inevitable violence could unleash, a sharp whistle fractured the tension once more. From the cabin's deepest shadows, a younger voice rang clear, a boy's voice, trembling yet unwavering. "I know who turned," he said. All eyes swung to the source, the Apache youth who had hidden amongst elders until now. "It's not just blood that divides us. Fear and old grudges break men." The traitor's jaw tightened, but his hand faltered on the rifle. Silence stretched thin and taut. "We were hunted long before this storm," the leader said, voice low and steady. "Betrayal runs deeper than this one man. It is the poison of a land that forgets mercy." The widow's eyes softened as she stepped beside the youth, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Then we break that poison now, not with more blood, but with the strength to stand united, to forge something new from these shattered shards." The riders' shadows blurred at the ridge, their hatred rolling down like thunder. Yet within the cabin, a fragile light kindled, a fierce hope born of shared hardship and the daring choice to trust beyond scars. "Let the law come," the Apache leader said quietly, voice rich with ancient courage. "We will meet it, not as enemies hunting ghosts, but as men who demand to be seen, heard, and remembered." A tense hour passed, every heartbeat stretched across the heavy air. Then, as the first pale light of dawn softened the bruised sky, the riders crested the ridge. Guns raised, eyes sharp, they slowed, but did not charge. The widow stepped outside, her silhouette tall and unwavering against the fragile dawn. She raised a hand, voice clear and ringing across the valley. "We offer peace." Her gaze swept the hardened faces before her. "Not because we're weak, but because strength is not measured by bullets, but by the courage to forgive." For a long moment, silence hung, a fragile thread stretched across acres of dust and storm-scarred earth. Then, the lead hunter lowered his rifle, a slow, reluctant gesture that shattered years of hostility, like a stone breaking glass. "We came with laws, but find something older here," he said gruffly. "Something worth more." One by one, the riders lowered weapons, the tension uncoiling, like storm-racked branches after the tempest passes. Back inside, the trader's stance slackened. The widow watched him carefully, knowing that true forgiveness was a journey harder than any gunfight. "You will answer for your betrayal," she said softly. "But this valley will not drown in more blood. Not if we stand guard." The Apache leader nodded. "Let this be the land where past and future meet, not in fire, but in the quiet strength of those who refuse to yield." Outside, the storm clouds began to break, revealing a sky trimmed in faint gold. The widow breathed in the sharp, clean air, feeling the weight of loss and hope entwined. Around her, the Apache Cowboys shared weary smiles, their bonds forged anew in sacrifice and trust. The boy stepped forward, eyes bright. "We carry the past with us," he said, "but it will no longer chain us." A soft wind stirred the sagebrush and the distant hills, carrying with it a promise etched in sun and rain, that even in this wild, harsh land, peace could be born, if only brave souls dared to believe. The widow turned her gaze toward the ridge where the first shadows had gathered. The valley was scarred, yes, but it would heal. They had chosen a path through fire and fear to something stronger, a community, fragile yet unbreakable. As the sun's first true light spilled across the plains, she whispered a quiet prayer, not just for survival, but for a dawn where the names and stories of these Apache warriors, these settlers and outcasts, would live on as a testament to courage, mercy, and the unyielding hope of the human spirit. The storm had passed. The valley remained, and in its stillness, a new story was waiting to be written.